That doesn't bode well.
Welcome back to the Obvious Choice podcast. The first time all three of us are wearing a hat. Mark it down. Episode 100 and something or other. All three of us are wearing a hat.
Feels like 3,000 episodes, John.
Sometimes. What I wanted to talk about today is about momentum, and momentum specifically with content, because it's something that I have been struggling with a little bit lately. And I was on I did my mentorship thing yesterday, and we spoke with this. This wasn't anything that's going to be on the podcast. This was a private call for them, but we spoke about this idea of momentum, and I came up with something that I've done when times are good that I kind of wanted to share about how to kind of structure and think about your content. And so I wanted to share that, and I thought it would raise a good conversation as well. Before I share it, though, I'm going to add the prelude that this is what happens, and these are the kinds of things that I do or that I've done when things are going well. This is not what happens all of the time. And I feel like a lot of the people who maybe give advice on stuff like this sometimes need to give that, like, preamble a little bit. Like, this is what I've noticed about my life or about how I do things when things are going well. And when things aren't going well, I can revisit this then and say, okay, well, maybe I got to get back to it. Because momentum in content is actually very, very important for a number of reasons. One is, if you do decide to publish content ongoing in order to build your personal brand, as we've already spoken about, I mean, look at it more as a savings account than anything else. Don't think about it as much as something that's going to get you short-term clients or short-term business. But if you think about it as a savings account...
John froze, but I think he'll be back in a second. Yeah, he's working his way back. But I like the concept of making it more like a savings account so that you don't think with any level of immediacy, right? You're thinking, I may not see the return on this investment today, but the most important thing is that I continue to invest until the return shows up. And a lot of people don't think of their content that way. I'm sorry, John. Please continue.
Yeah. They don't think about their content that way, do they? They think about their content as, if I post this today, it's going to get me all the customers that I need for the rest of my life. And that's just simply not how it works.
Order the yacht. I post it 3 times a day.
Yeah. Order the yacht. Yacht. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry I did that. Stop. Please don't do that.
You got to pronounce it as it's spelled. Yeah. That's how it's spelled.
Oh, my God.
So if you do decide to actually publish content, like, it's pretty important that you be consistent with it. Now, it doesn't mean that you can't take time off, but I think that when you are in a phase where you're publishing, you have to kind of stay in that phase for a long enough time for those things to kind of build on one after the next, after the next, after the next. And that's for a few reasons. One is, it's very rare that a single piece of content that you publish is actually by itself going to make a big difference. That having been said, one piece of content can actually generate an outsized amount of inbound traffic from other pieces of content. But that inbound traffic, the stickiness of it, often has to do with what else other people find on your page. I'm going to say that again. If you do something that generates a lot of inbound traffic, i.e. something goes viral or whatever it is, well, those people, if there's nothing else on your page that is similar or that has been posted recently, often will just like view that thing and then bounce. But if there are similar things on your page, the stickiness of those eyeballs that you've attracted often has to do with how much people stay. So it's very important for that reason. In addition, what you find is that absolutely it's very common that one piece of content, one piece of something that you do has outsized impacts above anything else that you do. Like, we talked about this with the PTDC traffic, where 95% of our traffic for years came from like 4 articles. You don't necessarily know what those articles are going to be. And it's the same with my Instagram account. It's the same with a lot of social media accounts. You'll find that often, a few kind of select pieces of material that you publish, they just do so much better than everything else. It's silly. But what happens is that they actually make everything else do better as well. And that's one of the keys. So if you're consistent, you post every day, and let's say on day 5 or even on day 20 or 30 or whatever it is, something that you do kind of pops off, even in like a small amount pops off and has an outsized impact in how well it does. Well, what you will find is that other content that you've produced starts to perform better retroactively, because people will be attracted from the new content, they'll see what else you've done. And if it's on the same types of subjects or the same types of ideas or spoken the same way, well, those people will also like the other stuff, which will almost cause it to repropagate, and they'll like it and comment and share it. And so you'll see that your past stuff will start to get more shares. And then, of course, the stuff you do afterwards, because now there will still be people coming to your page, like one post or whatever it is that usually does well for a week or two before it starts to kind of die down, which, I mean, is kind of shitty staying powered, considering how much effort you might put into it, but it's just kind of the reality of how much is put out there these days. So I wanted to talk about momentum, and we'll talk about this a bit more, and then I want to talk about how to actually get into the nuanced bits of how to create this momentum by being very specific in the topics that you're talking about. And I'll give an example on that as well. But first, as I started to talk about this, you immediately kind of nodded your head. What were you thinking?
Yeah, a lot of what I'm thinking goes back to stage performance, musical performance, because when you're in an industry that leans on artistry, you get certain pockets of momentum, right? You have to be prepared for those and be able to continue it. You deliver a great live show, you don't then go into the studio to try to produce pre-recorded music. You ride the string of live shows because people start talking about it, and fundamentally you deliver the same, if not a very similar show, until the sort of momentum dies. And what would happen in my former life when we were doing that, one show would lead to the next, lead to the next, lead to the next. And a lot of times the other gentlemen that were in the group, because I dealt with most of our business, would want to retreat and do something else. And I said, no, if we want to make some money, we need to ride this momentum. It will dissipate. It'll fall off. But I always think of everything's a performance to me. So I think of my content the very same way. And there are pockets of momentum. I love this topic. I never really thought about it, but I'm excited to hear what you're going to say and the structure you're going to provide for it. And I'm also excited to contribute a nugget or two, because this is really something that's important that I don't think most people notice it actually when it's happening to them, so they lose an opportunity.
Yeah. Something you said there, that the minute that somebody gets momentum or something happens, right, they retreat and do something else. That's kind of our knee-jerk reaction. I think we often get bored ourselves when we've done something because it's all that we see all of the time, and then we don't take a step back sometimes and realize that what we see is actually not what most other people see. We're obviously much closer to a thing than other people are. This is one of the things that I said to the group yesterday from the mentorship on that call was, other people don't notice a lot of what happens. Even if you go viral, and I said, the most viral post that I've ever had, 400 something thousand likes, over 10 million people saw it. And something like 40% of my audience saw it, and 60% of my audience didn't. I don't know, they just weren't online those 3 days, maybe. I have no idea why. But you think about that for a second, 400,000 likes, 10 million views, and 60% of my followers did not see it. I have other posts, interestingly enough, where a much higher percentage of my followers see it than that post. And I don't know why that is. I don't pretend to know why that is. Like I said, maybe people were just not online that day and they were online a different day more, and so they saw my post that other day. Who knows, right? Who knows? But to your point when, like, of repeating it, nobody notices, and the few people who do notice are probably closer enough to you that they like you. Like, I think about the podcast that I listen to. I think about even whoever's listening to this. If you're listening to this podcast now and you like listening to our podcast, it kind of gets to the point where the topic doesn't matter that much, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And maybe you've decided that you like us. Maybe you've decided that you like how we talk about things. Maybe you like how we maybe you decided that you just have some sort of comfort or familiarity with us that grows over time. You kind of know the way that we structure the show. You know what to expect. It's comfortable. It's familiar. It's friendly. And I feel that with other podcast shows, where relatively quickly, you know, what might attract me to that show originally is maybe one guest or one topic. But after a bit of a period of time, I actually don't even look at the topics. Like, I just like feel like listening to them and their vibe, kind of. And then there's other times where I just won't. There's podcasts where I'll just go like a couple months where I'll just stop listening to that podcast because I've just like lost interest in that vibe, and then I'll come back to it again. The topic itself doesn't matter that much. It's the same with a lot of serialized TV shows, and why it's so hard for me to like get into a show, because it's like, oh, now I gotta learn these characters. Now I gotta get familiar with this format. And that's an energy thing. That's a change thing. That's something that we need to kind of build up over time that's different from our natural patterns of what we're doing right now. And so the people who like your stuff enough to realize that you've repeated something or you've already spoken about a subject that way are people who are probably close enough to you to recognize or to be familiar and comfortable with you to know that, yo, I like this person, I like how they talk about a thing. They're going to be perfectly fine with you talking about it again. And then most other people just won't even notice because they didn't even notice you did it the first time, or if they did notice, they weren't paying much attention anyway. Very important to keep that in mind, because what came up on this call was Greg, who runs a program for surfers, talked about. He said, you know, he said something to the tune of like, this is really interesting because I always thought that like I should move around my topics. So over the course of a week, I should talk about the shoulder, and then I should talk about the knee, and then I should talk about popping up on the surfboard, and then, you know, maybe how like some sort of life with surfing post, and like every day should be different. Like that's how I always thought that I should think about my content. And I said, actually, I think that's wrong. I actually think it's much better to think of content as very distinct pockets of concentration around extremely nuanced topics where you tackle them from all angles. And so the person who brought this up was Shane, who works primarily with jiu-jitsu athletes, and he does a lot of FRC, he does a lot of rehab work with jiu-jitsu athletes. And here's the example that I kind of gave to him. I was like, what if, I'm like, don't, because where the question was raised was he asked if he should change his niche. And I kind of said, you know, the answer that I give more often than not these days, which is, I have no idea, but let's test it first before you make some huge decision. And so I was like, before we make this massive declaration to ourselves and to others of this is my niche, but why don't we just put stuff out there and take in feedback from others to see what resonates? You know, for whatever reason, people look at you as being interesting on a certain topic and not other topics, but also your own energy. I know sometimes when I publish content, even if it doesn't perform quote unquote as well as other pieces of content, I still feel better about that content going back to it. Then there's other stuff that I've posted in the past, and this is the biggest sign for me that I'm working in a way that is inauthentic to myself, where I don't even want to look at that post. Even if that post would do 15, 20, 30,000 likes, I'm like, yo, but this doesn't really matter. Like, this doesn't feel right to me. I said something because I felt like it was the type of thing that was going to perform well on social media. I didn't say something because it was true to me and what I think is really important. Mm-hmm. And I think that there's crossover for sure. But I also think that it's really important to take in energetically, kind of feel like, what did this feel like to me when I posted? So I said, okay, let's test this idea, right? Where maybe you just decide for a period of time, you're not going to tell anybody this, but just for like a 2 or 3 week period, you're only going to post about low back with jiu-jitsu athletes. Like, sure, right? Well, think about now, from a momentum standpoint, the type of person who's attracted or shares a post about that is the type of person that's going to be very happy to see other posts about that same subject tackled from different ways. So immediately now, there's that momentum that starts to build as you repeat consistently this type of idea, which I think is really cool. Where if somebody's attracted by one post, they're going to see that you've done other stuff, they're more prone to like that stuff and look deeper into you, and also probably follow you and maybe be interested in working with you. Because that's the type of thing that they're interested in. But also, from just a topic generation standpoint, like, thinking about what to talk about is really hard. Thinking about 5 different subjects to talk about every single week is absolutely impossible. You can't, I don't care who you are. Maybe Gary Vaynerchuk or some shit can do it. I don't know, that dude's a mutant. But like, most regular humans, like, I don't care who you are, you can't sit down on Monday morning and be like, here is my magical social media formula for this week. On Monday, I'm talking about low back. On Tuesday, I'm talking about why this matters. On Wednesday, I'm talking about ankle stability. On Thursday, there's this misconception about this thing with shoulders that I really want to, like, you can, I don't think you can maintain that. I certainly can't. But what I can do is I can sit down and I can say, okay, low back for jiu-jitsu, I'm putting in the center of my page. Cool. What are all the different pieces that come out of that mind map now? All right. Well, what are some good stretches? Okay, that's an easy post. What are some causes of low back pain with jiu-jitsu athletes? You could talk about ergonomics in their everyday jobs. You could talk about how maybe they don't hug people quite the right way when they're hugging on the floor. I don't really know. I don't know much about jiu-jitsu. I figure it's just dudes hugging each other, but like, you do you, man. You could talk about different types of rehab after you've hurt your low back so that you can get back to hugging dudes. Like, you could talk about, I'm sure that there is a famous jiu-jitsu athlete who hurt his or her back in a competition. I'm sure it exists. Look it up. And so then you can say, in 1992, Jimmy Garcia, the reigning jiu-jitsu champion of the United States at the time, I'm making up all this shit, hurt his back and couldn't compete in the world championships. Now here's what his training routine was like. One of the things that you notice is that it doesn't include any anti-rotation exercises. Here's the thing about jiu-jitsu is you're actually resisting force a lot more than you're creating it. So a lot of people think of jiu-jitsu where you're just hugging a dude. The truth of the matter is you're actually trying to resist another dude hugging you.
Oh, God. Oh, we've added another population to the list of haters today.
So the polyamorous vegan jiu-jitsu athletes from California have now logged off of this podcast.
Who are also disabled veteran amputees, because I offended them several shows ago.
And this is a very distinctive Venn diagram that only has a single circle. It's all the same person.
Oh my gosh. An all-encompassing Venn diagram.
Should we talk about ice baths?
Oh, man. I don't want to say anything else.
I feel like that would be a really funny, wise ass, John Goodman sarcastic post. Is just to draw a Venn diagram that's just one circle, so there's no overlap, and just write right? Polyamorous vegan jiu-jitsu athlete who posts about ice baths on social media that lives in California.
Oh my gosh. Listenership has once again dropped.
But think about how much you could do with that one very nuanced topic of low back for jiu-jitsu. You could do multiple posts on strengthening. You could do multiple posts on mobility, on stretching. You could talk about rotation, anti-rotation. You could talk about well-known people in that space who have had a low back injury. You could talk about well-known people in that space's training programs with a specific emphasis on low back or core stability. I mean, you could probably create an entire account on this, to be honest. But if you just say to yourself, okay, I know I'm not going to make this like declaration, but I know that for the next 2 weeks, whatever, 3 weeks, 1 week, this is what I'm posting about. I think that is a very good way to ease the content creation burden on yourself and generate momentum.
It's ironic that a lot of the students that we talk to, and Amber can speak to this probably even better than I can. So many of the students that we talk to are so frightened of not having a wide open general space to talk about. The idea of making things specific is so frightening for a lot of them. But really, it's so much easier to do almost every single thing when you're in a more nuanced space. It does the opposite of what you expect. It actually opens up easier, more easily created topics and content when you're just a little bit more nuanced, because nobody can think of the whole bucket at once. Like, it's too overwhelming to think about all of fitness and then pick from all of fitness what I'm going to talk about this week, man. It's just a lot simpler to whittle it down to something specific. And it's easier to become the person for that thing. That's the other thing. Like, you get to be the person for that particular thing, and people know exactly where to go to get it. It's just,
I mean, here's the process that I advise people to do all the time. It's just like, basically take a piece of paper. Like, I just scribble on notebooks basically all day. But you write like who your person is that you want to train, right? And I get it, you could train everybody, but like choose one. And the easiest way is just to work backwards. Okay? Write down a list. This is what's the book? I think it's called The Pumpkin Plan from Mike Michalowicz. So I'll give credit where credit's due. Work backwards from the best people you've ever worked with. Okay? So make a list on a piece of paper, draw a line down the middle. Write down on one side of the paper the 10 names of the 10 most favorite people you've worked with. Completely objective. Just like whoever you liked, right? Whoever you remember. On the other side of the piece of paper, go into whatever software you use, go into whatever billing you use, or just like go from memory if you don't have that, of who's paid you the most amount of money. So, total customer value. Call it customer lifetime value. Okay? So who's paid you the most amount of money? And then you just basically draw a line between them, because my guess is there's going to be a crossover of 3 to 5 people on that list. Generally, the people who we like working with the most are the people who pay us the most amount of money. And so now you have these people. Cool. Okay, well, from these 3 or 4 or 5 people, figure out who they are. Okay, well, like 3 of them were moms, or one of them was a construction worker, or whatever, right? Like, so basically just then, now you've worked backwards from the type of people that it seems like work best for you and your business based off of like what you like, and also like the hard data, like they've paid you the most amount of money. And I know that money isn't everything, but like money's a pretty good indicator that somebody's getting value. Okay, write down 1 or 2 defining characteristics of those people. Whatever maybe they're a mom, maybe they're in the military, maybe they're whatever, okay? Put that in the middle of the piece of paper. And then all that I'll do is just like draw a line to each body part. And so just write like ankles, knees, hips, low back, abs, chest, back, like, and then just like lose fat, gain muscle. Okay? And now, all that you basically do is you just look for like examples of well-known people or workouts or programs that you've built in the past that has to do with like knee health for a dude who works construction and mixes concrete all day. Whatever the example is. But you just look at like, okay, knee drills, and you can make it specific to this person. You could literally even go back to that favorite person you worked with and just look at the workouts that you did with them. Like so I guess what I'm saying is that when you do this process of working backwards, it becomes very easy to just visualize it and say, okay, well, this is the person. I already did the work for that person. All I got to do is just get better at sharing the work that I've already done in some sort of systematic fashion. Sweet. That's the process, to be honest, that I think most people in any business, I mean, it's not just coaches, but most people in any business should do is work backwards from your best customers, identify them as your avatar, write down as many different like higher level topic buckets that you can specific to that person or that type of person, and then you just go deeper into delivery, which you probably do with your product or your service anyway, and create content around each one.
The momentum has to start from some place, right? And starting from a general place to build momentum is really tough because it takes an extremely long time to build momentum in a general space. It usually takes, 50 to 1,000 times the amount of eyeballs and eardrums to build momentum in a general space, because there's no clear person. There's a lack of clarity for the viewer to isolate who they need to share you with. That's the bigger problem. If you're very general, who do I tell you about? Versus if you say, if all of your content is a recreation of Chappelle Show skits that talk about fitness, I'm going straight to Goodman. Like within a second, I'm going to say, John, have you seen this freaking fitness account? This guy does all the old Chappelle Show skits, but I know immediately. And confusion is something that suppresses conversion, right? Like when I'm confused, I'm impossible for you to convert. Clarity is what simplifies the ability to convert, and you don't get clarity very often in general spaces. So thinking about that and starting off with something specific, it can lead you more quickly down the path of building momentum, because people want to talk about a specific or new or particularly creative thing. Nobody's running to grab somebody to point them at your page because you talked about squats today. Because everybody talked about squats today. There's no novelty in it. So connecting. I talked to a coach today that worked with women who were camera operators in the film industry. And she was questioning whether or not that was a good niche for her. And she said, I also worked in the film industry and I burned out, so that's why I'm questioning it. I said, that's precisely the reason why you should do it. Because you've done it and you burned out. If you went back to coach yourself, how would you prevent yourself from burning out of that industry? There's your content. And I think people don't see that in themselves.
There's the video at the top of your sales page, man.
Right.
I burned out of being a camera operator.
Right.
If I were to coach myself, here's what I would do.
Here's what I would do. That's it. Like, you solved this problem by being, and she was concerned that it was too specific. And I told her, Amber, about the ski and snowboard engagement photo lady that you shared with the other. I was like, no, it's never too specific. And if you're frightened, that's probably the right way to go. Like, if it scares you that it's too specific, I think Amber said it, you're probably 2 more niches down from where you should be at that point. You need to get like really frightened about who you've chosen. But that's the best way to build momentum. People need to be able to refer other people to you.
Yeah, you gotta be known for one thing, or you're not known for anything.
Right. Right.
And at a certain point, you've gotten enough people results that, yeah, the niche doesn't matter quite as much, because you help. What did you say? A female camera operator? Is that what the example is? So you help a bunch of female camera operators. Well, it's probably always going to be a relatively transient industry. Female camera operators are around a lot of people in music and film and TV, where appearance does matter a lot. If they work for people over periods of time and those people notice visible changes in these people, they're going to ask them what they're doing. Those people are not camera operators. They might be on-screen personalities, for example. Well, now all of a sudden, you're working with a newscaster. You're working with a whatever. And it does, I mean, that you started with female camera operators doesn't matter. Does that mean that you can't get a soap opera star to look like a soap opera? I don't know, what do soap opera stars look like? I have no idea.
That's all right.
Good looking people, I'm assuming.
Relatively.
Spanish, probably.
They don't age often.
They don't age, but you know what they are. They're jiu-jitsu, they're polyamorous jiu-jitsu athletes who sit nice places.
Oh my gosh. Their kids age, though. Their kids go to boarding school at 5 years old, and 2 weeks later they come back 15 years old. And then 2 weeks later that, they're 30. And taking over the company. Yeah.
A lot of chest hair for Jorge.
Old hairy Jorge.
Hairy Jorge is unfortunate.
Jorge, if you're out there, buddy, it's time for a shave, all right? It's time for a wax, buddy. It's time for the weekly wax. But this was the concept of the conversation that we had, John. Like, going through this lens, it's almost like being specific and nuanced allows you generality later, right? Instead of starting out and always trying to come in, sometimes you thread that needle and it allows you more. You thread the needle and it stitches a wonderful career for you. There you go. I did it. I'm done for the day. It's Twizzler time for me. So I like the idea of momentum, John. Like that's a big overlooked thing. I want to ask a question if I can. I know we're.
Can I ask you to talk about more? Can you put a pin in that question? Because I want to talk about more about that idea of how being specific and nuanced very early on actually allows you to be more generalized later.
Yeah, absolutely.
I want to double tap on that because I think that's a really interesting concept that I've never thought about that way, but I believe to be true, and so I kind of want to talk through it a bit.
I mean, so here's the thing. People aren't really attracted to something that they can't easily identify with. But once they identify with it, you get to a point in their minds where it's the same way that people ask millionaires questions that don't have shit to do with being a millionaire. Like, you have money, you're known to be well-to-do, and all of a sudden people start asking you medical questions, right? It's because
a person who's completely disconnected from reality in every way, shape, or form.
Every way.
I'd love to know your opinion on politics for the masses.
Every way. It's the same thing here. You've demonstrated such expertise in such a specific area that, number one, it sticks out. You're going to stand out because nobody's willing to concentrate in this area. Number two, it's easy for the person that's in the category that you're working with to identify that you're exactly for them. And people who are in your category always have a ready list of peers who are in the same situation. So grabbing 3 or 4 or 5 or 600 more people is relatively easy for the viewer because they get a quick, easy understanding of exactly what you're talking about. They're going to go get other people, right? So what's happening is an organic branching of your audience, right? But it's branched from the fact that one type of person trusts you explicitly in one type of area to teach about one type of thing. And as they trust that, whether it's smart to do or dumb as shit for humans to do, we all of a sudden find ourselves trusting that person with all types of other shit that we probably shouldn't trust them with. It's just a natural thing. Like, if a person solves a deep problem that you have, you implicitly expect that they have the ability to solve a lot of different problems. They don't, but it'll cause you to bring more people. And as more people come, they're going to have different other issues. And you're able to speak more widely about whatever it is your expertise lies in, because you've built a wider audience that's sort of linked in on a chain of specificity. And most people don't do that. Let's be honest, very few people implicitly trust a generalist, right? The person that talks about a lot of different things. I have friends that are the jack of all trades. I do plumbing. I'm also a notary public. I also coach kids sports. Nobody thinks that person is excellent because of all that distribution of what they do. We think, this person needs to get focused, right? It's not how it's perceived. If you go through the lens of one, though, and then you branch out to other things, you can be a fine notary public, right? And then people start to say, well, you should coach a little league team. And through that expertise of the one thing, people are much more likely to trust you about other things. But it doesn't work the other way. Not in my experience. It doesn't work in reverse. You teach kids and you do karate and you fix sinks. I'm going to hire you to be my plumber in my $500,000 home. Probably not. But if I hired you as my plumber in my $500,000 home, you can definitely coach my kids in Little League football. Let's vote Jerry in, right? It's just interesting how human brains work that way. We don't perceive outside in, we perceive inside out. So starting on the inside is probably the best way for you to build momentum for any other things that you feel like you want to talk about. That's what I think about it. That's been my experience online in particular.
Sounds like an expansion of an idea of just transfer of trust. Of
yes,
how we transfer trust from one human to another.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I agree. It's not the most logical thing a lot of the time, but
that makes sense.
We need an excuse to give a personal recommendation for something, and it feels good to do that. Like, it feels good to know a guy, if a guy is a gender neutral term. It feels good to know a guy for something. It feels good to recommend a guy for something. But in order to recommend a guy for something, that guy, that gender neutral guy, needs to be known for something. We need to have that specificity, and so if you want to be the person who gets recommended more often, there needs to be a reason for that. It doesn't mean that you need to be everything that you do. And it's interesting because I'm thinking about this as you were talking. I was thinking a lot about the positioning and framing of the Obvious Choice book, and there's actually none of that kind of specificity with it, and I think that's missing. I think about Ryan Holiday's books, and they're effectively self-help books about overcoming, but there's the framing of Stoicism. You think about James Clear's books, or James Clear's book, right? And it's really about getting stuff done. It's really about achievement, but it's framed around habits. Mm-hmm. And so it's, you want to learn habits, go to this guy. Well, like, the deeper why of why a book is successful has nothing to do with habits. There have been lots of habit books that were just as good talking about habits, if not better than his. Where his book did really well, I mean, it's written very well, but also it really dialed into the deeper why, but it was still the habits that was there, and the same with a lot of Ryan Holiday stuff. I think the reason why it really jumps out is because it has this underlying theme of Stoicism that gets, it's Stoicism, that's how you overcome. Mm-hmm. I think that's really interesting. And that's really why there's such a transfer of trust amongst those books. Now I gotta find that with me. What do you think that is with me? Do my work for me. That'd be great.
I think it's the business coaching and the simplicity and the methodology. That's what I think. I pretty much trust everything else you say because none of the specific things in terms of what we do as coaches in this industry, none of it seemed grandiose to me, right? I don't know if you've ever mentioned the word six-figure hyphenated in any context of anything, and for me, that was a transfer of trust. It was, here's a practical, applicable, non-sexy, how would it look like if it were easy version of doing exactly what everyone else promises to do, but I'm willing to bring you in on the basement level to talk about it, and make it so ridiculously easy to apply that it just makes sense. Versus, here I am in front of my rented Lamborghini. I've taken 20 coaches to multiple seven figures, and you're next, right? And I'm like, nah, I'm good. So for me, that's where the transfer of trust now. And now I just trust anything you say. You're like, hey, let's start a podcast. I'm like, okay, sweet. Hey, Red, you want to start a podcast?
Even though
Yeah, fine.
after the fourth time, you still say yes.
Right, yeah, whatever.
It's the mental decluttering to me
Yes.
for you. Like,
Yes.
there's so many things, and you clear away the mental clutter. And I'm sure everybody's experience is different, but that was it for me. These are all of the things that I could be doing, and they all feel equally important. And the thing that you excel at is like, no, like 98% of that is stupid. Don't do that.
Right. Throw that shit away,
Really,
son.
the only thing that matters is this 2%. Do that, do it consistently, do it well, and think good things will happen. And so it's like the blunt, mental decluttering, and just super honest about it, and a little cheeky, which, anybody that's funny tends to earn a little trust with me. So
I actually really, Amber, I know I want this book to be called The Obvious Choice, but I don't know if it's going to now. Because you know what the best title for a book is that I've ever heard? 98% of what you're doing right now is stupid.
That is a great title.
That's actually a really good book.
And,
You're welcome.
And the subheading, How to Become the Obvious Choice, I don't say that it doesn't fit with that title, that's, damn, Amber.
Not necessarily how to become the obvious choice, but like how to figure out what the obvious choice is or something.
Whichever.
98% of what you're doing right now is stupid. God, that's good.
That's pretty damn good. Amber's been
That's
clutch.
pretty damn
I'm going
good.
to mute myself now.
Well, a lot of the issue that I have, I always think back to a story that John Berardi told me. And I don't remember the context. But one of his earliest books was called Scrawny to Brawny, if anybody remembers this. And I read the book. It was a great book because I was very scrawny and I wanted to be brawny. But here's the thing. I read the book, but I never told anybody about the book. And I remember when him and Nate Green created a side business. It was part of PN, but it was like a side coaching business as part of PN called Scrawny to Brawny. It was a men's-specific coaching program. And they had I don't know all of the details of it, but it kind of never really could get going. And it was a great business, and it was JB and Nate. Like they're both awesome. Like, how in the world did this not get going? And he told me, and he said, I actually really regret the title because it immediately cuts word of mouth off at the knees. Because nobody wants to talk about it. Even the people who are in the program don't want anybody to know that they're in the program. Because in joining the program, you are admitting or talking about how you're scrawny.
Mm-hmm. And
so I think you can do that like tongue in cheek. like this idea of 98% of what you're doing right now is stupid. Like, I think that that's like a really fun kind of tongue-in-cheek way of basically saying, hey, you dumb fuck. Like, stop being so stupid. But it's but you're not in sharing that, like this is the type of title I think about, The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck. That book went viral like no book has ever gone viral before. Way more than Atomic Habits. Atomic Habits has sold more copies than it now. Subtle Art's ascent was way steeper in terms of sales. Atomic Habits took a year or two to really get going. Sold a few 100,000 its first year, but took a couple years to get going. Subtle Art was like the first month. Like, nobody had even read the book. It was just, the title was so viral, and everybody was sharing pictures of the cover of the book.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so giftable. Like, that's the thing, is like, oh, I know 10 different people I can get this book for just based off of the title.
Fuck, this is good. This is good. When there was something else that you were going to say, and I double tapped on a different topic earlier. Do you remember what it was?
$2.49 for that. I can't. And it's only going to get worse as I get older. No idea.
I'm going to recommend another episode, and we can all get out of here then. How about that?
Do it.
I got what I needed out of this episode. That you did.
Oh, that's funny.
This is the most selfish podcast I think anybody's ever created. You should absolutely make content for your viewer and not for yourself. No, I think I'm going to do it the exact opposite way. That is my obvious choice. All right.
It's all right, John.
There's an episode, because we didn't end up talking about content in this episode, but we started talking about content and momentum in this episode. So I'm going to recommend you check out episode 60, which is called The One About Content. It goes really into deep. Oh my god, I can't even talk. I'm so obsessed with this title, Amber. It goes really deep into how to think about producing content for you and your goals versus somebody else's goals. It talks a lot about when you should show up, how you should show up, where you should show up, based off of where you are in your career, based off of what you want to get out of it. Not what the social media company wants you to do, right? How you can best leverage the social media to get what you want out of it. And so that's episode 60. Check it out. It's called The One About Content. And I'm just going to give a special shout out to Amber today. You're the real MVP.
She is the MVP. Well done, Amber.
All right.
It's been a string of MVP performances from Amber here lately.
And nobody was surprised ever.
No, we weren't surprised.
No.
We seen it.
Yeah. Okay, bye-bye.
Bye bye.